Some houses don't fall apart, they wait. The wind moved through the broken frame of the house like a quiet breath, slipping between warped boards and cracked windows that hadn't held glass in decades. And Daniel Hayes stood at the edge of the porch, his boots sinking slightly into damp wood that groaned under his weight, as if remembering every step it had ever carried. 40 years old and worn by more silence than most men could bear, he didn't come here looking for hope, only a place where the noise inside his head might finally quiet down. Beside him, Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, stood still, unnaturally still, ears lifted high, amber eyes locked on the darkened doorway as if something inside had already noticed them first. The air carried a faint scent of rust and old timber, the kind that clung to forgotten places, and when Daniel pushed the door open, it didn't creak loudly. It sighed, long and low, like something relieved to no longer be alone. Inside, dust drifted through thin beams of afternoon light, turning the air thick and slow. Every step echoed deeper than it should have, as if the house stretched farther beneath the surface than what the eye could see. Daniel dropped his worn duffel near the wall, the sound dull against the hollow floor, and for a moment, he simply stood there, listening, not to the wind, not to the distant trees, but to something quieter, something underneath. Rex moved first, his nails tapping softly across the uneven boards before stopping near the center of the room, his body stiffening, head lowering slightly. And then it came, a faint vibration, so subtle it could have been mistaken for imagination, but it returned again, steady, measured, like a pulse hidden beneath layers of wood and time. Daniel frowned, stepping closer, placing his hand against the floor as the sensation brushed against his palm. Real, undeniable, and too precise to belong to chance. Every 27 seconds, the same gentle tremor. Rex let out a low sound, not fear, not warning, but recognition, as if he had heard this kind of rhythm before, somewhere far from here, somewhere that still lived in instinct. Daniel exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the boards, noticing now what he hadn't before. One plank slightly darker, less worn, its edges too clean compared to the rest, and as the light shifted through the broken window, it revealed just enough to make him pause, because for the first time since he arrived, the house didn't feel abandoned. It felt patient, like it had been holding on to something, waiting for someone who wouldn't walk away. And Daniel, for reasons he couldn't explain, stayed exactly where he was, listening as the floor beneath him breathed again. The second pulse came softer, but it was still there, steady and deliberate, and Daniel kept his hand pressed against the floor, as if the wood itself might answer him if he waited long enough. 27 seconds. He counted without meaning to, the old habit returning like a shadow from another life. Rex shifted beside him, lowering his body closer to the boards, nose brushing the surface, breathing in slow, careful draws as though reading something written. Beneath the grain, the house held its silence around them. No wind now, no creaking beams, just that faint rhythm repeating beneath their feet. Daniel exhaled through his nose and leaned back on his heels, scanning the room with a sharper eye this time, noticing the way dust had settled unevenly, how the light caught certain edges but avoided others, and that single plank again, darker, cleaner, almost untouched by the years that had claimed everything else. He reached out and tapped it lightly. With his knuckles, the sound came back hollow, different from the dull thud of the surrounding boards. Rex's ears flicked forward instantly, his tail giving a slow, deliberate movement. Not excitement, not fear, just certainty. Daniel sat there for a long moment, weighing something he could not quite name. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quiet trust he had learned to place in the dog beside him. Or maybe it was simply the feeling that this place was not finished with him yet. He stood and moved to his duffel, pulling out a worn multi-tool, the metal catching a thin line of light as he returned to the spot. Kneeling again, he slid the blade carefully along the edge of the plank. The wood resisted at first, swollen from years of damp air, but then it gave slightly with a soft crack, not loud, not violent, just enough to suggest it had been closed for a very long time. Rex stepped closer, placing one paw beside Daniel's hand, steady and grounded, as if anchoring him to the moment. Another pulse moved through the floor, stronger this time, and Daniel paused, feeling it travel up through his fingers, into his wrist, into his chest. He swallowed, then pressed the blade deeper, and pried upward, slowly, deliberately. The plank lifted just enough to reveal darkness beneath, not the shallow crawlspace he expected, but something deeper, colder, a narrow opening that swallowed the light instead of reflecting it. A faint draft slipped upward, carrying with it the scent of stone and something older, something sealed away. Rex leaned forward and let out a quiet breath, his body relaxing in a way that told Daniel more than any sound could. This was not danger, this was discovery. Daniel sat back slightly, staring into the gap, the edges of the house fading around him as his focus narrowed to that single opening. He had come here with nothing, no plan, no expectation, just a place to rest, but now the ground beneath him had changed, literally, and somehow more than that. He reached down again, fingers brushing the edge of the lifted board, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir that he had almost forgotten. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of something that might one day become it. And as the next pulse echoed faintly from below, Daniel made a quiet decision. He was not leaving. Not tonight. Not until he understood what this house had been waiting to show him. Daniel did not rush, not because he was afraid, but because something about the space beneath the floor demanded patience. The kind he had learned in long silent hours where every second mattered more than movement. He widened the gap carefully, pulling the plank free inch by inch until it rested beside him, exposing a narrow opening just wide enough for a man to look through, but not yet step into. The darkness below did not feel empty. It felt layered, like time itself had settled there. Rex lowered his head further, letting out a slow breath that drifted into the opening. Then he sat back, calm, composed, watching Daniel with a quiet steadiness that felt almost like permission. Another pulse rose from below, stronger now that the barrier had been broken, and Daniel leaned forward, bracing one hand on the floor as he peered into the space. At first he saw nothing but shadow, thick and absolute. But as his eyes adjusted, faint shapes began to form, not random, not natural, lines too straight, angles too precise, something built, something placed there intentionally. He reached back to his duffel again and pulled out a small flashlight, its beam cutting clean through the darkness as he angled it downward. The light revealed a short drop, maybe 4 feet, onto a surface that was not dirt but stone, smooth and deliberate, and beyond that, just at the edge of the beam, something else, the faint outline of a wall. Daniel felt his chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. This was no crawl space, no forgotten gap beneath a house. This was an entry. Rex stood now, shifting closer again, his tail low but relaxed, his ears moving subtly, as if tracking something deeper than sound. Daniel lowered the flashlight further, sweeping it slowly across the space. The beam caught on metal for a brief second, a dull reflection buried beneath dust, then slipped away again, leaving only questions behind. He pulled back slightly, sitting on the floor with his legs folded beneath him, the weight of the moment settling in. He had seen structures like this before, hidden compartments, reinforced spaces, places built not to be found easily, places meant to hold something, or protect it, or hide it from the world above. His gaze shifted to Rex, who was now staring directly into the opening, not tense, not uncertain, just focused. As if he already understood what Daniel was still trying to piece together, another pulse moved through the stone below, steady as before, and Daniel placed his hand back near the edge, feeling it resonate faintly through the wood. It was not random. It was not the settling of an old house. It was patterned, controlled, almost mechanical in its precision. He drew in a slow breath, the air above feeling different now, heavier, like the house itself had changed since the opening was revealed. He looked around once more, at the cracked walls, the broken windows, the quiet emptiness that had seemed so simple just an hour ago, and realized none of it was what it appeared to be. This place had layers, secrets built beneath decay, and for reasons he could not fully explain, he was now part of it. Daniel reached forward again, gripping the edge of the opening with both hands, and this time, instead of just looking, he shifted his weight closer, preparing to go down, because whatever waited beneath that floor was no longer just a mystery. It was a call he could not ignore. Daniel lowered himself slowly through the opening, his boots finding the stone surface below with a soft grounded thud that echoed just enough to confirm what his eyes had already begun to understand. This space had been built, not formed. The air was colder here, carrying a stillness that felt untouched by the passing years above. He straightened carefully, raising the flashlight and letting its beams sweep across the walls. The light revealed smooth stone blocks fitted together with deliberate precision. No cracks, no collapse, only endurance, as if whatever was built here had been meant to last far longer than the house above it. Rex followed without hesitation, dropping down beside him with a quiet grace, his paws landing firmly as he lifted his head and scanned the space. Not startled, not uncertain, but aware, the kind of awareness that came from instinct refined over years of training and something deeper that could not be taught. Another pulse moved through the ground beneath them, clearer now, the vibration traveling through the soles of Daniel's boots and into his legs, steady and measured. The same 27-second rhythm. He turned slowly, following the direction of the sensation, the beam of light catching faint details as it moved, a narrow corridor extending forward, the walls narrowing slightly as if guiding them deeper, the ceiling low enough that he could reach it with an outstretched hand, yet strong, reinforced, untouched by decay. Daniel took a step forward, then another, each footfall soft against the stone. The sound absorbed more than echoed, as if the space preferred silence. Rex moved just ahead of him, leading but never rushing, his ears shifting subtly with each faint vibration, tracking something beyond human perception. The corridor opened after a few yards into a wider chamber, and Daniel paused at the threshold, the light revealing more than he expected. The room was not empty. Along one wall stood a series of old wooden crates, their surfaces worn but intact, stacked with a care that suggested intention rather than abandonment. Metal brackets lined the corners of the room, some rusted, some still holding their shape, and against the far wall, partially obscured by shadow, stood something larger, something that reflected the light just enough to catch his attention. He stepped closer, the beam steady now, revealing the edges of a reinforced steel door set directly into the stone, its surface dulled by time but unbroken, the handle intact, the hinges solid, as if it had simply been waiting. Rex stopped a few feet from it, sitting down slowly, his gaze fixed not on the door itself, but slightly to the side, where the faint vibration seemed strongest. Daniel followed that instinct, angling the light lower, and saw it, a small panel embedded into the wall beside the door, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. A series of markings, etched faintly into its surface, not decorative, but functional, precise. His breath slowed as he took it in. This was no random hiding place, no forgotten crawlspace beneath a broken house. This had been designed, planned, protected, and whatever lay behind that steel door had been meant to stay hidden until the right moment, or the right person. Daniel stood there in the quiet, the rhythm pulsing beneath him once more, and realized that the house above had never truly been empty. It had been guarding something that was now only a few inches of steel away from being revealed. Daniel did not reach for the door right away, not because he was hesitant, but because something about the space demanded respect, the kind that came from understanding that whatever had been built here was not meant to be rushed. He stepped closer instead, the beam of his flashlight lowering toward the small panel set into the wall, its surface etched with faint lines that seemed almost invisible until the light struck at just the right angle. Rex remained still behind him, seated but alert, his gaze fixed on the same spot as if the answer had always been there waiting to be seen. Another pulse moved through the ground, steady and calm, and this time Daniel noticed something different. The markings on the panel seemed to catch that rhythm, not moving, but aligning with it in a way that felt intentional, as though the system beneath the house was still active, still responding. He reached out slowly, brushing his fingers across the surface. The metal was cold but not lifeless. There was a subtle vibration beneath it, faint but unmistakable, and as he traced the lines, he realized they were not random. They formed a pattern, a sequence of shapes that resembled coordinates or measurements, something technical, something designed by someone who understood both precision and patience. Daniel leaned closer, narrowing his eyes as the memory surfaced, faint but familiar. Patterns like this were not uncommon in secure builds, especially those meant to protect something valuable. something worth hiding not just from time, but from people. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the colder air, and shifted the flashlight slightly, illuminating the edge of the steel door once more. The handle was simple, no lock visible, no keypad, no modern system, which meant whatever controlled access was likely tied to the panel itself. Rex stood then, stepping forward with quiet certainty, his nose hovering just inches from the markings before he let out a soft breath and tapped the wall lightly with his paw. Once, then again, not random, not restless, but deliberate. Daniel watched closely, his focus sharpening. The rhythm returned beneath his feet, and almost without thinking, he mirrored it, tapping his fingers gently against the panel in the same measured interval. One, then waiting, then again. The space seemed to hold its breath with him, the silence deepening until even the faint sounds of the world above felt distant. And then it happened, not suddenly, not violently, but with a quiet shift, a soft internal movement from within the wall, the kind that could be missed if you were not paying attention. Daniel froze, his hand still resting against the metal as he felt the mechanism respond. The panel gave slightly beneath his touch, and a faint click echoed through the chamber. Rex's ears lifted higher, his body relaxing just enough to signal that whatever had been waiting was now beginning to reveal itself. Daniel drew in a slow breath, his eyes lifting to the steel door as the handle shifted almost imperceptibly, no longer fixed, no longer sealed. And for a moment he simply stood there, not moving forward yet, because in that quiet space, with the air colder and the ground still pulsing beneath him, he understood something clearly. This was not luck. This was not chance. Whatever had been hidden here had not been lost. It had been waiting, and somehow, without ever meaning to, he had become the one it was waiting for. Daniel did not move at first, even after the faint click echoed through the chamber, because something in that moment felt larger than the act itself, like the space around him had shifted in a way that could not be undone. The handle on the steel door rested slightly lower now, no longer locked in place, and the air seemed to settle into a deeper stillness, as if the mechanism had not only opened a path, but awakened something that had been waiting in silence for far too long. Rex stepped closer to his side, his shoulder brushing lightly against Daniel's leg, grounding him in a way no thought ever could. The dog's gaze fixed forward, calm and certain, and that was enough. Daniel reached out slowly, wrapping his fingers around the cold metal handle. It felt solid, unyielding, yet not resistant, and when he turned it, there was no struggle, only a smooth release, the kind that suggested careful engineering rather than force. The door shifted inward with a low, steady motion, not a creak, not a groan, but a controlled glide that spoke of intention and precision. And as the gap widened, the darkness beyond did not remain empty. It revealed itself layer by layer under the narrow beam of the flashlight. The space inside was larger than he expected, not just a chamber, but a constructed room, reinforced walls lined with metal framing, shelves built into the stone, and on those shelves, objects arranged with care, not scattered, not forgotten, but preserved. Daniel stepped forward slowly, crossing the threshold. The air inside was different, colder, but also cleaner, untouched by the decay of the house above. Rex followed without hesitation, his movements quiet, his presence steady. As the light moved across the room, it caught on surfaces that reflected softly, metal edges, glass coverings, sealed containers that held their shape despite the passing years. Daniel approached one of the shelves, lowering the light to examine what rested there. Old documents, bound and stacked neatly, their edges yellowed but protected. Next to them, small boxes, some wooden, some metal, each one closed, each one placed with intention. This was not storage, this was preservation. He moved further in, the beam shifting toward the center of the room, where a larger structure stood, a reinforced chest, its surface marked by time but not weakened by it, the kind of build meant to endure, meant to protect what mattered most. Daniel paused in front of it, his breath steady but deeper now, not from fear, but from understanding. Whatever lay inside this room had been hidden with purpose, and whatever lay inside that chest had been worth protecting above all else. Rex stopped beside him, sitting once more, his posture calm, his ears relaxed, as if the journey to this point had already fulfilled its purpose. Another pulse moved faintly through the floor, softer now. As though its role was nearly complete, Daniel knelt slowly, placing the flashlight beside him so its beam illuminated the chest directly. His hand hovered for a moment above the surface, not hesitant, but aware that this was the moment where everything would change, and in the quiet that followed, with the house above silent and the world beyond forgotten, Daniel finally reached forward, ready to uncover what had been waiting in the dark all along. Daniel's hand rested on the surface of the chest for a moment longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition that this quiet room had carried its secret through years of silence, and now it was offering it without resistance. The metal beneath his palm felt cold but steady, like everything else in this hidden space, built to endure rather than fade. He traced the edge of the lid, noticing the precision of its construction, no rust eating through it, no weakness in the hinges, just time resting on top of something that refused to be forgotten. Rex remained beside him, his breathing slow and even, his presence grounding the moment, as if he understood that what was about to happen mattered in ways neither of them could fully explain. Daniel shifted his weight slightly and lifted the lid with a firm, controlled motion. It opened without struggle, revealing its contents gradually as the beam of the flashlight settled inside. At first it was not the shine of gold or anything obvious that caught his attention, but the order, the careful arrangement of everything within, rows of sealed containers, thick envelopes bound with worn twine, and beneath them, layers of something heavier, something that reflected the light in quiet, muted tones. Daniel leaned closer, adjusting the flashlight to see more clearly, and then it revealed itself, not all at once, but piece by piece. Bars of metal stacked with deliberate precision, their surfaces dulled by time but unmistakable in form. Coins sealed within protective cases, documents stamped and signed, each one carrying weight not just in material, but in meaning. This was not a random collection. This was a legacy, preserved with intention, protected beyond what the world above could ever see. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath steady but deeper now, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes were already beginning to understand. The value here was undeniable, but it was more than that. It was the story behind it, the reason it had been hidden, the care taken to ensure it remained untouched until now. Rex shifted slightly, lowering his head closer to the chest, sniffing once before settling back again, calm, almost satisfied, as if the discovery itself was not the end, but simply the confirmation of something already known. Daniel reached into the chest carefully, lifting one of the sealed envelopes, its paper aged but preserved, the seal still intact. He turned it over in his hands, feeling its weight, not heavy in ounces, but in significance. Whatever was written inside had been meant for someone, meant to be found when the time was right, and somehow, that time had arrived. He placed it back gently, his movements measured, respectful, as his gaze moved across the rest of the contents. The gold, the documents, the carefully stored pieces of a life that had been hidden beneath a house the world had already forgotten. And in that quiet chamber, with the faint pulse beneath him now softer, almost fading, Daniel realized something that settled deeper than any thought. This was never just about what was inside the chest. It was about why it had been left, why it had endured, and why, after all this time, it had chosen to reveal itself now, to him, a man who had arrived with nothing but the willingness to stay. And as he sat there in the stillness, the weight of the moment did not feel like fortune. It felt like purpose finally finding its way back to someone who had almost stopped believing it ever would. Daniel did not take anything from the chest, not yet, because something about the moment told him this was not meant to be rushed or claimed too quickly. Instead, he sat there in the quiet, the faint beam of the flashlight casting long shadows across the carefully arranged contents. And for the first time since he had opened it, he began to look beyond the value and into the meaning behind it. The documents, the preserved envelopes, the way everything had been stored with such deliberate care. It was not just wealth, it was a message waiting to be understood. He reached for one of the bound folders this time, lifting it gently, the cover stiff but intact, and when he opened it, the pages inside revealed more than numbers or transactions. They told a story. Handwritten notes, property records, names, dates stretching back decades, all connected in a way that felt intentional, as if the person who built this place had left behind not just assets, but a path, a guide for whoever would one day find it. Rex shifted slightly beside him, resting his head on his front paws, watching without tension, his presence calm, as if the discovery itself had settled something deep within him. Daniel turned another page, then another, each one adding pieces to a picture that was beginning to take shape. This had not been hidden out of fear or greed. It had been protected, preserved for a reason that went beyond the simple idea of fortune. Another faint pulse moved through the floor, softer now, almost like a fading echo, and Daniel paused, his hand resting on the page as he listened. The rhythm that had guided him here was changing, not disappearing entirely, but quieting, as if its purpose was nearing completion. He closed the folder carefully and set it back exactly where it had been, his movements measured, respectful, because now he understood that this place was not meant to be disturbed carelessly. It was meant to be continued. His eyes moved across the room again, taking in the shelves, the containers, the reinforced walls that had protected everything through years of silence. And he realized something that settled deeper than any surprise. The broken house above was never the full story. It was only the surface, a shell that concealed something far more enduring, something that had waited not for strength, not for wealth, but for someone willing to listen, to stay, to notice what others ignored. Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears relaxing as he looked toward the doorway behind them, not as a warning, but as a quiet acknowledgement that the path forward no longer lay deeper underground, but back above. Daniel followed that instinct, rising slowly to his feet, the weight of the moment still present, but no longer overwhelming. And as he turned toward the exit, the flashlight casting one last sweep across the room, he understood that what he had found here was not simply a hidden treasure. It was a second chance shaped by time, waiting for someone who had once lost everything to finally find something worth keeping. And in the silence that followed, with the pulse beneath him now barely there, Daniel stepped away from the chest, carrying with him not the gold, not the documents, but the quiet certainty that his life had just shifted in a way that could never be undone. The climb back up felt different, not because the distance had changed, but because Daniel had, each step carrying a weight that was not physical, but deeply rooted in something he had not felt in years, something steady, something certain. His hands gripped the edge of the opening as he pulled himself back into the house, the worn floorboards greeting him with a soft creak that now sounded less like decay and more like acknowledgement. Rex followed in one smooth motion, landing beside him with quiet confidence. And for a moment they both stood there, just listening. The silence above no longer empty but full, as if the house itself had shifted from something forgotten into something alive again. Daniel moved slowly through the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim natural light filtering through the broken windows. Everything looked the same, the cracked walls, the dust, the worn structure, yet nothing felt the same, because now he understood what lay beneath it all. The house was no longer just shelter, it was a gateway, a responsibility, a continuation of something that had been carefully preserved across time. Rex walked ahead, his posture relaxed, no longer searching, no longer alert in the same way, as if his role had shifted from guide to companion once again. Daniel stepped onto the porch, the air outside cooler, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant earth. The sky stretched above him in quiet openness, and he took a slow breath, letting it settle deep in his chest. He looked out across the empty land surrounding the house. The isolation that had once felt like an escape now felt like space to rebuild, to understand, to decide what came next. His mind moved back to the documents, the records, the structure beneath the floor, and the realization settled in more clearly now. This was not just a hidden fortune. It was a legacy with intention, something that had been passed forward not randomly, but deliberately. And now it was in his hands, not because he had searched for it, but because he had chosen to stay when others would have walked away. Rex sat beside him, his tail resting lightly against the wooden boards, his gaze calm as he looked out into the distance. And Daniel placed a hand on the dog's head, a quiet gesture of gratitude, because without that instinct, without that silent guidance, none of this would have been found. The wind moved gently across the porch, carrying a soft sound through the broken edges of the house. No longer a hollow whisper, but something closer to a breath, steady and at peace. Daniel looked back over his shoulder at the doorway, at the space he had entered with nothing, and left with something far greater than he could measure, not just wealth, but purpose. A reason to rebuild not only the house, but the parts of himself he had long left behind. And as the light shifted across the land and the day moved forward, he made a decision without speaking it out loud. He was not leaving. Not this place. Not this opportunity. Not the quiet promise that had found him here. Because sometimes the things the world leaves behind are not lost at all. They are simply waiting for someone willing to see their worth. And in that still moment, with Rex beside him and the house standing quietly behind, Daniel understood that his life had not just changed. It had been given back to him in a way he never expected. And this time, he was ready to hold on to it. The next morning arrived quietly, not with urgency, but with a kind of stillness that felt earned. The pale light of early sun slipping through the broken windows and stretching across the floor where Daniel had once stood unsure of what this place held. Now he moved with purpose, not rushed, not driven by excitement, but guided by something steadier, something grounded. He stepped across the room with measured strides, pausing near the opening in the floor, looking down into the darkness below. The faint pulse was gone now, completely gone, as if whatever had called to him had finished its work. Rex approached beside him, glancing down only briefly before turning away, his attention no longer fixed on what lay beneath, but on the space around them, the present. Daniel exhaled slowly and reached down, pulling the plank back into place, not sealing it away in fear, but covering it with intention, protecting it as it had once protected what was hidden below. The wood settled into place with a soft, final sound. And in that moment, the house above felt whole in a way it had not before. He straightened and stepped back, scanning the room with new eyes. The broken edges were still there, the cracks, the wear, the signs of time. But now they no longer spoke of abandonment. They spoke of something waiting to be restored. He moved toward the far wall, picking up a loose board and setting it aside. Then another. Small actions at first, simple, practical, the kind of work he knew how to do, the kind that did not require overthinking. Rex followed him from one side of the room to the other, occasionally stopping to watch, occasionally stepping outside and returning, as if adjusting to this new rhythm just as Daniel was. Hours passed without notice, the sun climbing higher, the light growing warmer, and with each task completed, the space began to shift, not dramatically, but enough to feel, enough to matter. Daniel paused near the doorway, wiping his hands on his jeans, his breath steady, his mind clearer than it had been in a long time. He looked out across the land again, the same open stretch of quiet earth, but now it no longer felt empty. It felt like something he could shape, something he could build on. His thoughts returned briefly to what lay beneath the floor, the gold, the documents, the legacy left behind. But instead of overwhelming him, it settled into the background, not forgotten, but placed where it belonged, as a foundation, not a destination. Rex stepped up beside him and sat, his shoulder pressing lightly against Daniel's leg, a silent gesture that said more than words ever could. Daniel reached down and rested his hand on the dog's back, his fingers brushing through the thick fur as the wind moved gently around them, carrying a softer sound now, no longer hollow, no longer searching, just present, just real. And in that quiet moment, Daniel understood something that felt simple but profound. The house had not changed because of what he found beneath it. It had changed because he had chosen to stay, to listen, to see what others had missed. And now, step by step, he would rebuild it, not just as a shelter, but as something that held meaning again, something that could stand for more than what it had once been. And as the day moved forward, with Rex beside him and the work beginning in small, steady motions, Daniel felt something settle inside him that had been missing for a very long time. Not just hope, but direction, quiet, firm, and finally his own days passed in a rhythm Daniel had almost forgotten existed, not marked by noise or urgency, but by steady work and quiet progress. The house slowly responding to each small repair, as if it had been waiting for hands that understood how to care without rushing. He replaced broken boards one at a time, reinforced the weak beams, cleared away years of dust and neglect, and with every task completed, the space began to feel less like a ruin and more like something that could hold life again. Rex stayed close through it all, sometimes watching from the doorway, sometimes moving alongside him, his presence constant and calm, no longer searching for hidden signals, but simply sharing the space as it transformed. The nights grew quieter too, not empty, but peaceful, the kind of silence that did not press against the mind but allowed it to rest. Daniel found himself sleeping more deeply than he had in years, waking with a clarity that felt unfamiliar but welcome. And in those early mornings, with the light just beginning to stretch across the land, he would sit on the porch with Rex beside him, looking out over the open space that no longer felt like something to escape, but something to build within. The thought of what lay beneath the floor never left him, but it no longer carried urgency or disbelief. Instead, it settled into something steady, a foundation beneath everything he was doing, a reminder that what had been hidden was not meant to change him overnight, but to give him the chance to change things slowly, deliberately. He returned below only once during those first days, not to take, but to understand more clearly, bringing the flashlight and one of the folders back into the light above. Sitting at the table he had cleared, reading through the pages with careful attention, the names, the properties, the notes left behind all began to connect in ways that revealed a larger picture. This had been built by someone who believed in continuity, in leaving something behind that could be carried forward by the right hands. And as Daniel traced the lines of that history, he began to see where he fit into it, not as an owner in the usual sense, but as a caretaker, someone chosen not by status or strength, but by presence, by the simple act of staying when others had not. Rex rested nearby as he read, his steady breathing filling the quiet space. And every so often he would lift his head, as if acknowledging the shift happening, not just in the house, but in the man beside him. Daniel closed the folder after a long while, setting it down gently, his thoughts no longer scattered but aligned. The future ahead of him no longer felt uncertain in the way it once had. It felt open, shaped by his choices rather than defined by what he had lost. He stood and stepped outside again, the air cool against his skin, the land stretching out in quiet possibility. And as he looked back at the house, now standing a little stronger, a little more whole with each passing day, he understood something that settled deep within him. This place had not just given him a second chance, it had given him something far more lasting, a reason to move forward with intention, to build not just for survival, but for meaning. And in that steady rhythm of work and quiet reflection, Daniel began to create something that would endure long after the broken pieces had been replaced. Something that, like the secret beneath the floor, would one day speak for itself to someone else who needed to find it. The change did not come all at once. It revealed itself in quiet details, the way the front door no longer sagged when it opened, the way the windows, though still imperfect, allowed light to settle inside instead of breaking apart at the edges, and the way Daniel moved through the space without hesitation, as if he had always belonged there. Mornings became something he looked forward to, not because of what he might find, but because of what he could build. Each board replaced, each wall reinforced, each corner cleared of dust became part of something larger than repair. It became restoration, not just of the house, but of a life that had once felt beyond repair. Rex adapted just as naturally, his movements relaxed, his instincts no longer searching beneath the surface, but focused on the present. Sometimes he would lie near the doorway watching the horizon. Other times he would follow Daniel closely, pausing when he paused, moving when he moved, a quiet partnership that needed no words. One afternoon, as the light shifted into a softer gold, Daniel sat at the small table he had repaired, the folder open in front of him once again. But this time he was not searching for answers. He was reading with understanding. The names, the properties, the notes left behind no longer felt distant or disconnected. They formed a map, not just of wealth, but of intention. Whoever had built the hidden chamber had not only preserved resources, they had preserved purpose, land tied to community, notes about repairs, mentions of people who had once depended on that work. It was not about holding on to fortune, it was about continuing something that mattered. Daniel leaned back slightly, the chair steady beneath him, and let that realization settle. This was not meant to be taken and left behind. It was meant to be carried forward, slowly, carefully. With the same patience it had been given, Rex lifted his head from where he rested nearby, watching him with quiet attention, and Daniel gave a small nod, not to the dog, but to the understanding that had finally taken shape. He closed the folder gently and stood, stepping outside into the fading light. The land stretched out before him, no longer empty, no longer uncertain, but full of possibility that did not demand urgency, only commitment. He walked a few steps forward, the grass soft beneath his boots, the air cool and steady. And for a moment he simply stood there, taking it in, the house behind him, the space ahead, the quiet presence of Rex at his side, and the knowledge of what lay beneath it all, not as a burden, but as a foundation, something solid, something earned not through searching, but through staying. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground, Daniel understood that what he had been given was not just a second chance, it was a responsibility shaped by trust, a chance to rebuild something that would not only stand for him, but for others who might one day need it. And in that calm, steady moment, he chose to accept it fully, not with excitement or fear, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally found where he was meant to be. Seasons began to move across the land in quiet, steady cycles, the kind that did not rush or demand attention but reshaped everything with time, and the house stood through it all. No longer broken, no longer forgotten, but restored piece by hands that understood both loss and patience. Daniel no longer counted the days since he arrived, because time here no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like something to live within. Mornings came with purpose, afternoons with progress, and evenings with a calm that settled deep in his chest. Rex remained at his side through every moment, his presence as constant as the wind that moved through the trees, no longer searching for hidden signals, but simply existing in a place that had finally become home. The land around them began to change as well, not dramatically, but enough to notice: a cleared path here, a repaired fence line there, small signs that life was returning, not because it had been forced, but because it had been invited back with care. Daniel still visited the chamber below from time to time, never taking more than what was needed, never disturbing the order that had been preserved. For so long, he treated it not as a vault, but as a trust, something that connected him to a past he respected and a future he was slowly building. The documents guided him when he needed direction. The resources supported the work, but neither defined him. What defined him now was the quiet consistency of showing up each day, doing what needed to be done, and choosing to remain when it would have been easier to leave. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft gold and fading blue, Daniel sat on the porch once more, the same place where he had once stood unsure of everything. Rex lay beside him, his breathing slow, his eyes half closed, content in a way that needed no explanation. The house behind them stood solid, not perfect, but strong, its walls holding warmth, its structure carrying meaning. Daniel looked out across the land, the same open space that had once felt empty, now stretching out as something full, something alive, and he realized that what had changed was not just the place, but the way he saw it, and the way he saw himself within it. He had not been saved by what he found beneath the floor, he had been restored by what he chose to do after, by the decision to stay, to rebuild, to carry forward something that had been left behind with intention. The wind moved softly across the porch, no longer a hollow whisper, but a steady presence, like a quiet reminder that some things do not disappear. They wait, patiently, for someone willing to listen. And as the light faded into evening and the first stars began to appear, Daniel rested his hand gently on Rex's back. A simple gesture that held more meaning than words ever could, because in that stillness, he understood something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the greatest fortunes are not the ones you uncover, but the ones you are trusted to build, slowly, quietly, and with a heart that finally knows where it belongs.